Those who come in compact cars like cheap customers just leave. For my mom's 60th birthday, I decided to take her and my daughter to a fancy restaurant that's known to be always booked. But there was unexpected trouble at the restaurant. The restaurant manager started making fun of us, calling us poor. Then, "Let's just leave." My mother, clearly angry, spat those words. But the manager just smirked. However, all the other customers stood up at once, glaring at the manager. My name is Rebecca Miller, 28 years old. I'm a single mother with a 3-year-old daughter. I separated from my husband due to differences in our values. After that, I decided to raise my daughter on my own. When I went back home to share the news, my mother welcomed us warmly. All the tension I'd been holding back was released, and I broke down in tears. Seeing me like this, my mother offered for us to live with her. She's been living alone since my father passed away a few years ago. She said she'd be happy to have us, so I accepted her kind offer. My mother is turning 60 this year. I wanted to do something special for her, so I booked a reservation at that upscale restaurant. It said that the restaurant is booked for years in advance. I always wanted to try it once. I was ready for a long wait, but luckily there was a cancellation, and I got a reservation for my mom's birthday month. When I told my mom, she was thrilled. Just seeing her reaction made it all worth it. Finally, the day of our reservation arrived. I drove my mom and daughter to the restaurant. I never imagined we'd run into any problems. "You're Ms. Rebecca Miller, who made a reservation, right? Please come this way." The grand entrance was befitting of a high-end restaurant. My mother and I were in awe, admiring the lavish decor. Only my daughter was her usual cheerful self. Seeing her, both my mom and I smiled. Seeing how happy my mom looked, I felt this was going to be a great day. "After making you wait, here's the appetizer." A salad was placed in front of us, with precise movements. Just seeing the dish made both me and my mom excited. They also had a special menu for my daughter, which I thought was a great touch. While we were enjoying our meal, my mom glanced around the restaurant. "I know that person. And that one over there. The one on TV? Yeah." While helping my daughter with her food, my mom replied with a smile. At that moment, I thought to myself, and looked around just like my mother would. Indeed, I recognized many of the faces around me, and I felt as if I had joined this glamorous world. Furthermore, it appeared that everyone was smiling at the delightful sight of my mother and daughter. Even though they were accommodating when I made the reservation, I had hesitations about bringing my young child. But the reassuring looks from those around me finally made me feel at ease. The appetizers were done, and the first main course was brought out. Seeing the elegant and lavish presentation, I instinctively took out my phone and snapped a photo. Immediately, a staff member approached me. It was a different person from the one who showed us to our table. He had a very displeased look, which made me feel a bit taken aback. "Excuse me, can you please not take photos?" he said. "Oh. I'm sorry, This is what happens with poor folks. Why do we even have people like you in our establishment? Who let you in?" "Huh?" I clearly heard the muttered comment from the staff. And it made me feel quite uncomfortable. Trying not to let it show, I looked down. Not wanting to dampen my mother's spirits. But as I wrestled with my feelings, my daughter's crying brought me back to reality. She had dropped the bread she was eating on the floor. Her cries echoed in the quiet restaurant. Others started turning their attention to us, and in a panic, I tried to soothe her. But the more I rushed, the less effective I was. That's when the earlier rude staff member approached. "Ma'am, you're disturbing the other patrons with the noise." "I'm so sorry. I'll calm her down right away. You shouldn't bring kids to places like this." His sarcasm was evident, and this time my mother clearly heard him. Those words seemed to have reached my mother's ears this time. She frowned and spoke softly but firmly to the staff member. "Your attitude is what's really tarnishing the reputation of this place." However, her words backfired. The staff's attitude became even more hostile. You do realize this isn't a place for children, right? I was just letting you know. If you keep making a scene, should I call security? His arrogance and rudeness made both me and my mother's blood boil. But we realized that getting angry would only play into his hands. Taking a deep breath, I tried to remain calm. Beside me, I could hear my mother doing the same. I truly apologize for the disturbance. My daughter has stopped crying. Can you give us a moment? The staff member, arms crossed, stared at us, waiting for our next move. Could you calm down? You're inconveniencing other guests. I distracted my daughter by giving her some bread from my plate. She immediately stopped crying and started eating happily. I let out a sigh of relief and, after sharing a glance with my mom, I tried to apologize to the staff again before taking my seat. But the staff, looking even more irritated, confronted us again. Do you even understand what I'm saying? I'm telling you to leave. This restaurant is too upscale for you. But my daughter has calmed down. She might cry again, right? And each time she does, you'll be disturbing everyone. This is supposed to be a fine dining restaurant. You're ruining the experience for others. We haven't even received half of our meal. We've already paid in advance, and we informed the restaurant about my daughter when we made the reservation. There shouldn't be a problem. So what? This is exactly why poor people like you have such low standards. If you keep this up, I'm gonna call the manager. The disgruntled staff member quickly walked off to the staff room. My mother and I were left speechless, wondering how someone could be so rude. Didn't he realize that his attitude was what was truly lowering the restaurant's standards? Despite this being a special celebration for my mother's 60th birthday, my mood was completely ruined. While it's true that I'd made a scene, I couldn't be too confrontational about it. Pondering our next move, my mother and I exchanged looks when the earlier staff member came back, now with a man who looked to be the manager. Upon seeing his face, I inadvertently let out a gasp. That's because the manager was none other than my middle school classmate, Daniel Thompson. Is that you, Rebecca? Daniel seemed to remember me too. The staff member, with a surprised look, asked him, "Do you know her?" I felt a wave of relief. Back in school, Daniel was always the earnest and cheerful type, quite reserved. He typically hung out in small groups, separate from the mixed group I was part of. I remembered him mainly because he once confessed to having feelings for me. At that time, I was seeing someone, so I had declined. But even after that, we'd talked a few times. I thought Daniel would have addressed the staff's behavior. "Oh, Rebecca was my classmate. By the way, Rebecca, are you sure you should be here?" "What do you mean?" "I heard the rumor, you know. You're a single mom now, right? People say single moms are usually broke. My restaurant is high-end. It'd be a problem if you said you couldn't pay later." Daniel looked at me with a mocking smile, sizing me up without any restraint. I was taken aback, blinking in disbelief. I had remembered him as a kind soul in middle school. It seemed he had changed a lot. "How can you say that? I made a reservation and paid in advance." "Right. You've always been headstrong, haven't you? Maybe that's why your husband got tired of you? You gotta know how to flatter sometimes." "What does that have to do with anything? Why does it matter? Isn't that your compact car outside? What if it is?" When I replied with a hint of irritation, Daniel chuckled. "People who drive compact cars can leave." "What?" I was genuinely shocked by Daniel's statement. "Didn't you notice when you parked? No one else drives a compact car here. Everyone's driving Mercedes or something similar. Aren't you embarrassed to be so out of place?" He looked at me with utter contempt. It seems the Daniel who once said he liked me was long gone. His change was so baffling. He sized us up with a look of disdain. "You look downright poor. Not fitting for my restaurant. You get that the staff was right, so why don't you just leave?" I began to get irritated by the treatment, as if they were lecturing us, as if we were making a fuss and refusing to leave the store. After all, we had made a reservation and paid. We had every right to dine there. Judging people based on appearances was something I could never imagine the old Daniel doing. But after all he said, there's no reason for my mom and me to stay. The food might be good, but we don't want anything to do with a restaurant that has disrespectful staff and a manager. Daniel, you've changed. If you're going to be like this, we're leaving. When I said that, he seemed satisfied. I'm living the dream. I'm definitely better off than you now. Don't think you can just casually call me by my first name. It's a shame you've changed. When I said that, Daniel smirked. That's because you rejected me. Making fun of me even though you're not that pretty. Well, at least I'm happier now. Isn't it refreshing? He cheerfully said that and high-fived a nearby staff member. Both of them laughed. Apparently, Daniel still held a grudge about being rejected back in the day. Realizing that made his horrible attitude make sense to me. Humph. Say whatever you want. I'm surely happier than some guy who still holds a grudge from so long ago. I have a wonderful daughter and a kind mother. Let's go, Mom. When I snapped back confidently, Daniel seemed to become even more pleased. He probably thinks I'm just being a sore loser. It ticks me off to no end, but shouting at him now would probably have no effect on him. I never imagined a classmate of mine would change so much. Today was supposed to end on such a happy note. With these thoughts, I picked up my daughter and looked at my mom. She too seemed furious, as she abruptly stood up. You've made quite a mockery of my daughter. We don't want anything to do with a place like this. As you said, we'll be leaving. Right, folks? My mom made that declaration loudly, echoing throughout the restaurant. Neither Daniel nor I had any idea whom she was addressing. Then, to our surprise, all the diners who had been enjoying their meals started to get up and prepare to leave. What on earth was happening? I was just stunned, not understanding the situation. Wait. Folks, what's going on? I'm sorry for the ruckus, we're gonna kick these rude folks out right away, just hang on a moment. Daniel frantically tried to keep the diners from leaving. But cold stares were directed at him from every corner. Daniel was visibly flustered, not understanding the turn of events. Two elderly men approached him, shouting, "How dare you treat Mrs. Miller like that? We've enjoyed this place for a long time, but we'll never come back." Shouted at, Daniel looked around the restaurant with a fearful expression. Following the two elderly men's lead, all the other diners started scolding Daniel. They all began expressing their gratitude to my mother. While holding my daughter, I was just gawking at this astonishing scene from the side. Those who began chastising Daniel were all recognizable celebrities, politicians, and obvious affluent folks. I had no idea why they were indebted to my mother. Wait! What's going on here? What happened? Daniel, his face turning blue, desperately tried to calm everyone. The annoying staff member next to Daniel was also going pale. I sent a questioning look to my mom. Then she revealed a shocking truth. All these people used to be my regular customers when I was a traditional sweets maker. What? I was just as shocked as Daniel. I knew my mom had been a sweets maker, but I had no idea she catered to such clientele. Then one of the celebrities next to us said, "Mrs. Miller's sweets were the best in the country." My mom listened to those words with an embarrassed expression. I might not be a professional craftsman anymore, but thanks to them, I surely became proficient. I'm truly grateful. In that sense, the customer is truly a god. Hearing that, I felt my mother's greatness deeply. Daniel looked completely taken aback, holding his breath and tensing up. My mom approached the stunned Daniel and spoke in a calm tone. You also need to cherish your customers. This store is precious to you, isn't it? At my mother's words, Daniel growled in response. He seemed totally on the defensive. Still, trying not to be outdone, he feigned confidence. Hey, quit it! What's this about the customer being God? Such an outdated way of thinking isn't popular nowadays. Daniel's scream, which could be taken as a cry of anguish, echoed across the floor. Yet, my mom didn't even flinch. You think caring for the customer is just a passing trend? Hearing this, Daniel choked back his words. He seemed intimidated by my mom's firm stance. However, rather defiantly, Daniel wouldn't accept my mother's viewpoint.
We are the ones providing the food. We're more important than the customers. This is absurd. I am important. If your daughter, Rebecca, hadn't rejected me, I wouldn't have treated you this way. That's right. Apologize to me right now, and maybe I'll even consider making Rebecca my woman. That would be a way out of your struggling life. Sounds good, doesn't it?
Daniel said that, looking at me. I was utterly disgusted with him and sighed deeply. I'm sorry, but to be honest, I can't deal with you right now. As I told him off and lowered my head, chuckles arose from the surrounding crowd, and Daniel's face turned beet red. Although I thought my response was pretty obvious, Daniel, with his baffling confidence, seemed to have never expected another rejection.
Why not? I have money, you know. You don't want to be looked down upon, right? And isn't it embarrassing to be a single mother? Women like you probably can't remarry, so I'm offering to take you.
It's none of your business. Just because you have money doesn't guarantee happiness. She brushed him off, and his face turned even redder. I wondered if money was the reason behind Daniel's transformation. They say money can lead to one's downfall, but seeing it firsthand was a first for me.
How dare a single mother like you talk back to me?
By now, whatever Daniel said didn't resonate with me at all. In fact, after hearing my mother's words, Daniel's just seemed pitiful. Then, a loud voice echoed from the back of the restaurant. All of us in the store were startled and looked for the source. A middle-aged man appeared. Seeing him, Daniel instantly looked uneasy.
Daniel, what on earth are you doing?
Why is Dad here?
I heard Mrs. Miller and her family were dining here, so I wanted to greet them. What's with all this commotion?
It seemed that the man who appeared was Daniel's father. I hadn't seen him since middle school, but he seemed very stern and dignified. Earlier, one of the staff had muttered something about the boss. So, this man must be the owner of the restaurant.
I gave you the position of manager after hearing you lost your job, but the business is only declining. Now I see why. What? You saw? Yes, I arrived a bit earlier. I peeked in when I heard the noise, and there you were, insulting Mrs. Miller's family. With all the arrogant things you were saying, do you even realize how wonderful a person Mrs. Miller is?
The boss interrogated him, and Daniel was sweating bullets.
What? This old hag is supposed to be someone special? Watch your mouth. Mrs. Miller helped fund the opening of this restaurant. Huh? This old lady has that kind of money? Of course. Mrs. Miller's husband owned a famous traditional candy store. And Mrs. Miller herself worked in the tough world of candy making, even as a woman. She's experienced so much more in life than you. I wish I could boil down her wisdom and give you a taste.
The owner said all this in a huff, then turned to face us.
I'm so sorry for the trouble my foolish son has caused. Come on, apologize. Why should I? I'm the manager of this upscale restaurant. Didn't you trust my abilities enough to leave me in charge? This is my place. I make the rules. Enough of your arrogance. Oh, what have I done, making someone like you the manager? That's it. I'm so disappointed in you. You're never setting foot in this place again. What?
Daniel's mouth dropped open in shock. In a panic, he began to apologize to his father, but the owner's decision was firm.
You're apologizing to the wrong person. You should be apologizing to Mrs. Miller and her family. Please, I'm so sorry. I've finally made it and I don't want to lose it all over something like this. And you're still going on about that? You unbelievable guy.
The owner shrugged in sheer disbelief, his face showing obvious shock. Of course, he'd be feeling this way. No one would want to find out their child was so arrogant and disrespectful. If my daughter had been like that, I would have made the same decision as the owner. We all glared coldly at Daniel. The owner then began to share the story of how Daniel started working at the upscale restaurant. Apparently, Daniel used to work at a renowned hotel. But he racked up debts from gambling, and debt collectors caused chaos at the hotel, resulting in his firing. Lost and desperate, Daniel returned home to his father, who worked at an upscale restaurant, and begged for a job. At the time, Daniel's father had been offered a promotion to become the CEO of the company. So he decided to leave the upscale restaurant to his son and oversee several other restaurants in the same chain. At first, Daniel worked sincerely, and the owner had peace of mind. However, sales at Daniel's restaurant began to drop significantly. The owner had been trying to figure out the cause for a long time. I've received complaints about Daniel's terrible attitude from the staff. But there was no evidence. And I wanted to believe him since he's my son. Today, that hope turned to certainty. It's truly a shame. The owner looked at Daniel with a dejected expression. Daniel, looking as if he'd been struck by lightning, began to apologize desperately.
Dad, please forgive me. I've been doing my best, haven't I? Rebecca, please say something to my dad for me.
What exactly should I say?
We were classmates, remember? For old time's sake.
After how you acted, you're really something. You truly are the worst.
No way!
Seeing the disdain in my eyes, Daniel looked even more dejected. Both my mother and I were so taken aback that we just sighed. After that, Daniel lost his position as the manager of a high-end restaurant and was disowned by his father, leaving him without a home to return to. It was later revealed that Daniel had accumulated new debts he had kept hidden. Despite earning a good salary, he spent almost all of it on gambling, treating his staff poorly almost daily. However, he favored one particular staff member who always gave us a hard time. That's because this staff member was Daniel's junior from his college days. It seems hiring him was also on Daniel's orders. Given this junior's problematic work attitude, it seems he was kicked out of the restaurant along with Daniel. Having lost everything, Daniel delved even deeper into gambling to drown his sorrows. Now, he seems to be struggling to pay off his debts. He's really not a good person at all. My mother's 60th birthday celebration got ruined, so we gathered all the people who were at the restaurant that day and later rented a room in a hotel for a party. That hotel was owned by Daniel's father, who generously let us use a room for free as an apology. I made many friends there. And I realized just how much people loved my mother. Everyone there had met her when she worked as a traditional sweet maker, coming to her shop to buy sweets as gifts. The fact that she still has connections to this day is probably because she's such a charming person. I too want to emulate my mother and become a mother my daughter looks up to. My colleagues manage with this. Stop complaining when you haven't contributed a cent. That's what Bob exclaimed as he threw $300 at me for our monthly expenses. The kind, ideal husband I thought I had was nowhere to be found. Holding on to that money, I smiled brightly and replied, I contribute $2,000 to our home every month. Seeing the shocked look on Bob's face, I stood up to meet his gaze. Do you even know our monthly rent? What are you talking about? It's probably around $100, right? Even if we lived in rural Nebraska, can one really expect to rent a 3-bedroom apartment with soundproofing for just $100? Holding back my urge to yell, I quietly placed the divorce lawyer's business card on the desk. Whoa, what's gotten into you? Calm down. Bob tried to soothe me, his lips quivering, but I calmly responded. It's not sudden, it's all according to plan. I stared at Bob with cold eyes, his shock rendering him speechless. My revenge has only just begun. My name is Michelle Miller. I'm a 35-year-old housewife. And work as a piano teacher. Before getting married, I worked officially at a music school. After marriage, I started offering private lessons at home. Juggling household chores, childcare, and teaching piano, my days are pretty packed. I married Bob when I was 28. We met at a charity concert organized by the piano school I worked at. Bob helped coordinate equipment and acted as a liaison between us and the venue. He wasn't exactly adept at his job, but he was quick to bond with the venue staff, ensuring smooth negotiations. Bob asked me for my contact information on our way home from the afterparty of the competition. I accepted Bob's invitation for a date, and we began to go out together. Before I knew it, our relationship blossomed, and we got married on our 3rd anniversary. Bob and I have 2 children. One is a boy who looks just like Bob, and the other is a girl who looks just like me. People often say that boys resemble their mothers and girls their fathers, but in our case, it was the exact opposite. We used to joke about that. We were a very close-knit family, always going shopping together. However, once our children started elementary school, Bob began acting strange.
I'll be home late.
Again?
You've been busy lately, haven't you?
My husband, who only occasionally worked overtime at the beginning or end of the month, suddenly had many late nights. He would always come home late, reeking of alcohol. He mentioned that since he switched to a sales job, he had a lot of client dinners, and I thought, gee, working in a company must be tough. Thankfully, since I didn't accept students in my home piano lessons in the evenings, our children were never left alone at night. Because of this, I felt a strong responsibility to support Bob to the best of my ability. However, he gradually began to show a colder attitude towards me. At first, it was small complaints about meals or housekeeping, but soon, he started nitpicking about how I spent money.
Hey! What's for dinner today? It's unfair that the meal for the breadwinner, which is me, is the same as for you and the kids. Mine should be more extravagant.
Well, I work too, you know. And the kids are growing, they need proper meals.
Stop being so selfish. Only young women can get away with that. Stop making excuses and listen to me. Forget it. I'm gonna eat out.
What? Saying that, Bob left, leaving me and the kids in shock. I felt anger rising, but seeing my children frightened by Bob's outburst, I decided it was more important to comfort them. I chose not to worry about where Bob went. But from that day on, Bob's behavior changed drastically. Apart from weekday overtime, he also started working more weekends. Despite complaining, I saw a delighted Bob getting ready, and I couldn't help but feel this isn't about work. Women's intuition, as they say. Observing Bob closely, I noticed many red flags. Though he never had an interest in fashion, he started buying brands that younger people would like. He would often be on the phone on our balcony late at night. And to top it off, I saw a transaction for women's jewelry on our credit card statement. The final straw was when Bob suddenly started dictating how the household expenses should be used.
All these years, you've been overspending, which limited what I could do. From now on, our monthly budget is $300. Got it?
$300? That's impossible. Just the groceries for the 4 of us cost over $500.
That's because you're being extravagant. From now on, I'll spend as I please. If you want to spend money, earn more yourself.
True to his word, from the next month, Bob only gave me $300. I managed with my earnings and some savings, but it was not enough to maintain the lifestyle Bob expected. I might have to consider divorce, I thought for the first time. Whether there was another woman or not, I used to think, if he comes back to us before the kids are grown, it's okay. I was trying to reassure myself. But when I considered whether my children needed a father who acted irresponsibly and didn't care for his family, I felt that maybe we didn't need Bob. I was still a bit hesitant, but one day an event happened that made me decide on a divorce.
Would you shut up?
It was a Sunday morning, and I was making breakfast. Surprisingly, Bob, who usually leaves early, was still home. The kids went into his bedroom hoping to play with him. Then, with a loud voice that could probably be heard outside, Bob yelled at them.
Hey! Why'd you yell out of nowhere like that? Isn't taking care of the kids your job? Stop slacking off. You're their father too, you know.
Huh?
I don't need noisy kids around. I'm trying to get some rest here. Keep 'em quiet.
The reason you're tired is probably because you've been staying out late every night, maybe cheating on me. I bit my tongue, holding back from saying that out loud. The kids were clearly frightened, hiding behind me. Seeing them like that, the idea of divorce solidified in my mind. I need to protect my kids. As we looked at Bob, who was now snoring loudly in bed, I made up my mind. Later, I started by checking my own finances. Could I maintain our lifestyle while continuing my classes from home? And what about the future of the kids? To my surprise, I realized that I could sustain our lifestyle just on my own income. The reason our expenses had shot up was because of the family credit card which we had gotten for both of us. Seemingly forgetting it was a family card, Bob had been using it here and there. Sometimes, the bills even exceeded $1,000 a month. I had only been checking the total amounts, but Bob's charges started increasing right around when he began working late. And they were all at fancy restaurants and hotels, the kind you'd go to for a romantic getaway. My love for Bob cooled to absolute zero as I realized he might be using our family card for trysts with his affair. But confronting him now might just make him hide the affair. So, I decided to first make sure our finances were rock solid, and then corner him once everything was set. About 3 months after learning about Bob's affair, I managed to gather all the evidence. Bob had no idea that I was onto him, so gathering evidence was a breeze, no need for a private investigator. Then, on Bob's payday, I decided to make my move. Getting ready for a date with his mistress perhaps, Bob was in high spirits that morning, humming while picking out his clothes. I approached him cautiously. "Hey, isn't it payday today? The $300 you've been giving for household expenses isn't cutting it. I think you'd understand if you checked our finances."
Will you stop with the excuses? It's all your incompetence. You've ruined my mood.
He interrupted me angrily. But I persisted.
But, it's not enough. At this rate, we might have to sell the house.
Bob sighed dramatically and ran his fingers through his hair. He took out his wallet, pulled out 3 bills, and waving them at me, said,
"My colleagues get by with this. You haven't chipped in a cent, so stop complaining."
Saying that, he threw the $300 meant for our expenses at me. The kind and loving husband I had married was nowhere to be found. I clenched the money and smiled back at him. "I put $2,000 into our home every month," I said. Bob looked at me with a blank expression. Standing up, I met his gaze. "Do you even know how much the rent for this house is?"
What are you talking about? It's probably around $100, right?
Regardless of living in the countryside of Nebraska, can you really believe you can live in a 3-bedroom house with a mortgage for just $100? Holding back my urge to yell, I quietly placed the divorce lawyer's business card on the desk. "Michelle, what's going on?" "Calm down," Bob said, trying to soothe me with a twisted smile. "It's not sudden. It's all according to plan," I replied coldly. Bob looked shocked, at a loss for words. I stared back with indifferent eyes. The revenge has only just begun. Bob seemed utterly bewildered when I suddenly placed the divorce lawyer's business card on the desk. To make things clearer, I placed another set of documents on the table. Seeing them, Bob's face turned pale. What does this mean?" "These are my income statement and our household expenses." What I showed him was our household ledger, the house contract, and the copy of the account book we report to the IRS. The ledger detailed our monthly expenses, and the house contract showed the monthly mortgage repayment.
"You're lying about the $1,000 rent,"
he accused. "No matter how rural Nebraska is, it's a custom-built house with a soundproof room. There's no way we could live here for just $100 a month," I retorted. Indeed, the house we live in now was custom-built when we had our child, with both our parents contributing to the down payment. It's my dream house, made possible because I had a lifetime job and both our families supported us. However, compared to the housing market in our area, it was significantly expensive. But even with our parents paying half the price up front, our monthly payments turned out to be much higher compared to neighboring rental properties. We did discuss the price with Bob at the time. But he brushed it off, saying, "I'll leave it to you, Michelle." I used to think he trusted me. But now I see he just found the topic tedious.
Why didn't you consult me properly? Isn't that a waste too?
Bob argued.
Oh, I did.
You just didn't engage.
Besides, half of the rent came from my piano lesson earnings, and ever since you only contributed $300 for living expenses, I've been covering everything else.
You have no right to complain, I countered. Bob was speechless. But he didn't look convinced. He glared at me. And then, as if recalling something, smirked.
Fine, my bad about the rent. But you should have shown me these papers earlier. I would have thought about it then,
he said.
Who was the one barely home to discuss these matters?
Bob fired back.
All right, then just add the rent to the $300 living expenses. If you have an income too, why should I bear all the expenses?
He seemed to be on the defensive now. Looking closely at the household ledger, he began marking it with a red pen nearby.
This, and this. All unnecessary expenses. We don't need these lessons. Look, it can be managed in $300. You just spend too much.
So, he has money for his mistress but not for our children? I was boiling inside. But it was too early to bring that up. I glanced at the clock, then gave Bob a sweet smile. Do you know the average monthly grocery bill for a family of 4?
Huh? Around $120, ain't it? That's why $300 is more than enough.
On average, it's $870. What? That's right. The average for a family of 4 is close to $900. Our grocery bills are usually around $600. That's after cutting corners wherever possible. Bob was lost in thought. Why didn't he realize that living on $300 a month was impossible? I began to feel a headache coming on. So, you can't live on $300. Do you get that? No way. What?
It's a lie.
Suddenly, Bob started acting like a child, vehemently denying the truth. I looked at him with disbelief. What I once found endearing, his childlike qualities, now at the age of 40-something seemed just creepy.
My colleague said he can live on $300 a month. You must have altered the numbers.
Exasperated by Bob's persistence, I replied. Well, maybe Catherine, a 22-year-old newbie still living with her parents, might be able to manage with that amount.
Why are you bringing up Catherine?
The mention of the woman's name seemed to have caught Bob off guard, his confidence vanishing. With a cold sweat forming, he stood still. I laid out a few pictures and credit card statements on the table for Bob to see. Catherine Smith, 22, lives with her working dad at a major company and her stay-at-home mom. After the party for the new employees, one thing led to another with you. I know about your affair that began after you played the gentleman sending her home.
How do you know all this?
Because she told me herself.
What?
Bob was in shock. After all, it's rare for a wife to hear details of an affair straight from the other woman. Oh, I became friends with her. On social media. It was easy. Just approached her, saying I too was having an affair. She quickly spilled the beans, even shared photos.
But, how?
In the age of information, you gotta be careful. She shared photos, like this one. I said as I placed a picture of them in a compromising position right in front of Bob. Bob, with eyes darting around, was sweating profusely. Oh, and she should be receiving one of these soon.
Receiving what?
This legal notice. I said that and handed Bob the certified letter. It was an official document my lawyer, whom I had contracted while gathering evidence, had prepared for me. As Bob read through it, his face turned pale.
$5,000. I can't afford that.
Oh, your father said that amount was reasonable, didn't he?
What? You told my parents?
Of course. They should be here any moment. Just then, the doorbell rang. I simply replied "Come in" to the person on the intercom and returned to the living room. Michelle, is everything sorted?
Thank you. Right on time.
That's good to hear. My mother-in-law stood behind her husband, looking utterly devastated. My father-in-law, usually a calm man, was red with rage. He approached Bob and landed a solid punch.
Ouch! What was that for, Dad? You're no son of mine. Betraying Michelle? You're the worst. I'm gonna knock some sense into that rotten character of yours.
Bob was in shock, and frankly, seeing my father-in-law this angry was a first for me too. Right then, the intercom rang again, signaling another visitor. I told the person on the other side to come in. I told the person on the other side of the intercom. Come on in. Bob was speechless upon seeing that person. Now that everyone involved is here, I'd like to resume our discussion. Please have a seat over here. I said that and pointed to the chairs I'd set up at the end of the table. Both my in-laws and the other guests who arrived later took their seats as instructed. After confirming that everyone was seated, I resumed the conversation with a smile. Now, Catherine, please introduce yourself. I'm Catherine, 22 years old. I'm so sorry. Bob invited me and I couldn't refuse. That act is quite enough.
Huh?
Catherine pretended to cry and kept apologizing, but I cut her off. Caught off guard by my unexpected attitude, Catherine looked shocked. She probably wanted to play the innocent role of a young new hire who was invited by her boss and couldn't say no. Unfortunately for her, I knew all about her plans.
You told me everything, didn't you? On Instagram, right, Ms. Lemon Candy? No way.
Catherine turned pale and stared at me as if she had seen a ghost. Her parents looked at her in confusion. I then spread out the printed conversation between Catherine and me on the table for everyone to see. The conversation detailed a shameful account of their affair. Catherine's parents seemed to be shifting between anger and embarrassment. After a while, her mother stood up and slapped Catherine.
Ouch! What was that for? You told me you were confused because you didn't know he was married and got a legal document about it. What is this? You knew he was married, encouraged a divorce with his wife, and then there's all this trash talk.
Catherine's mother seemed very sensitive about the subject and began to tear up. I did feel a bit sorry for her, but it was a mess her daughter had gotten into. Plus, it'd be good for her to know what I'd be talking about next. Also, seeing your husband every day and then hitting on another married man from the same department? That's some stamina.
Wait, that's...
Bob had a disbelief look on his face as he listened to my words, but when Catherine seemed very flustered, it seemed he realized it was true. Fuming, Bob stood up, grabbed Catherine by both shoulders, and yelled.
You had another man besides me? Who is it? Do you know how much money I spent on you? And you cheat on me? You wretched woman!
Hey! You were the one who made the first move on me. Even though you have a wife and kids. It's a privilege for you to date a young and cute girl like me.
What? How can you be so deluded?
Watching the two of them bicker, I sighed. Blaming their affair partner while ignoring their own faults, really? There's a limit to how foolish one can be. It seemed like I wasn't the only one who felt this way, as both sets of parents looked utterly dumbfounded. Then, Catherine's father, who had remained silent till now, stood up. The arguing Bob and Catherine noticed and fell silent. Catherine's father began speaking slowly. Michelle, I deeply apologize for everything. We want to cover the damages for emotional distress. We know a dairy farmer looking for help, and we'll send Catherine there to work off the debt. She won't leave that place until she pays us back in full, and we won't be providing any assistance. I don't think this makes up for everything, but does this solution work for you? I'd rather not have her name appearing in my bank account every month. So, I appreciate your offer. Whether you cut ties with her is up to you. Catherine's father left with Catherine and her mother. As soon as I felt a sense of resolution regarding Catherine, the front door closed and Bob said something surprising. Hey, Catherine had me fooled. So, can we start over? I'll do whatever you say. That's fine. I can't stand being with you anymore.
Let's get a divorce. And of course, I'll be seeking child support and division of assets. What? No way!
Bob looked dejected as he slumped back into his chair. My father-in-law forcefully dragged Bob out of the house and took him back to their family home. Finally, it was over. Alone in the living room, I took a deep breath, relaxed, and then started preparing dinner for my children who would be home soon. And after a short while, she started preparing dinner for the kids who were gonna be home soon. Later, I and Bob divorced without any issues. Bob's father-in-law was furious, and even his mother-in-law said she never wanted to see his face again. Thus, Bob was cut off from his in-laws. Naturally, he didn't get any financial support and asked if he could pay me in installments, but I refused. As a result, it seemed Bob had to take on debt to pay the alimony. Moreover, his affair with Catherine was exposed. He managed to keep his job but was moved to a lesser role in the company. Apparently, he got a 40% salary cut. With his reduced income and the debt to repay, it's said he's been working part-time at construction sites at night and even on weekends. I heard Catherine is working non-stop at a relative's ranch. She used to love cosmetics, but now she's living in a place where the only nearby salon is run by elderly women in their 70s. She can't even afford makeup, let alone get her nails done. Every day, she laments that things didn't turn out the way she expected. It seems she's also being sued for alimony by the wife of another man she had an affair with. It sounds like her liberation won't be happening anytime soon. As for me, I'm living happily with my 2 kids. My piano lessons have been gaining popularity. After I started evening classes just 3 times a week, they got fully booked by adults who wanted to learn the piano, and my income has been steadily increasing. I thought my kids would be sad after the divorce, but it turns out it was just me who felt that way. They even told me,
"We like you even more after the divorce, Mom. You're cooler."
That made me feel a bit happy. Education is gonna cost a lot, but if things continue this way, I'll be able to save enough for my children's desired future paths. Listening to the beautiful melodies my students play on the piano, my heart dances with excitement for the bright future ahead. Even though I still lived at home when I turned 40, my younger sister, Mary, always looked down on me deep inside. In fact, one of the reasons I hadn't married was because of Mary. But she used that as a means to mock me and always ridiculed me. However, ever since I told her we should cut ties, she hasn't been involved with me at all. Then one day, Mary showed up and was like, "I'm gonna live here from now on. But, since I'm expecting a child, there isn't enough room. So, Sarah, you need to move out within 3 days." When I told our parents about it, they seemed taken aback and said,
"Then, we'll move out too."
I was relieved to hear that from them. Mary, unaware that both our parents are gonna leave, will be in for a shock. She probably can't imagine a future where she ends up unhappy. My name is Sarah. I have a younger sister, 5 years my junior. Her name is Mary. Unlike me, who has an average height, weight, and a face you'd see anywhere, Mary has a model-like figure, a cute face, and has always been treated kindly by others. Relatives always doted on the younger, adorable Mary more than they did on me. Even our grandparents, I believe, adored Mary more than they did me. Among those friends and acquaintances who wanted to get close to Mary, some compared our looks, mocking me and boosting Mary's ego. Maybe it was the accumulation of such instances. But Mary gradually started to believe she was superior in everything compared to me. However, even if Mary was praised more for her looks, I was the more serious one, so I excelled in academics. So, Mary kept pestering our parents and was like, "Show me the grades Sarah got when she was my age," and when they actually showed the grades from when I was Mary's age, it turned out my grades were better. Mary, in her anger, sometimes tore up my certificate right then and there. Our parents feared that if this continued, Mary's negative behavior would persist into adulthood. My dad was often like, "Stop comparing yourself to Sarah all the time. Mary is Mary, and Sarah is Sarah. It's silly to compare." When Mary compared our looks and was like, "Sarah, you're really ugly. Can you please not call yourself my sister?" my mom scolded her and was like, "Mary, if you keep up with this bad attitude, no matter how cute you are now, people will quickly see how ugly your personality is and won't want to be around you." However, even though mom and dad tried their best to correct Mary's behavior, most of our relatives took Mary's side, and above all, our grandparents absolutely adored Mary. I don't know what Mary said to them, but our grandparents were like, "It's terrible to be so hard on Mary. Maybe you're just jealous of her. Why don't you send Sarah away to my parents?" Before we knew it, our grandparents started giving allowance and gifts only to Mary, but not to me. Upon seeing this, my dad was furious. He was like, "How can you treat the same grandchildren differently based on their looks? Are you really my parents?" We're done, and he decided to cut ties with our grandparents. Since then, we've never been to our grandparents' house or attended any family gatherings. Mary seemed unhappy about it, but since mom and dad were firm on their decision, she probably realized that making a fuss on her own would be pointless. When Mary reached middle school, it seemed she wanted to be adored in circles outside of our family. At Mary's middle school, the reputation she had differed vastly between boys and girls. The boys referred to Mary as the best girl they'd like to date in school, while the girls seemed to label her as a mean girl. By the time Mary started middle school, I was already in high school. I only heard these rumors when I learned that one of my classmates had a younger brother attending Mary's middle school. Apparently, the rumors about Mary were widespread throughout the school. From what I'd gathered, whenever a friend of hers got a boyfriend, within just a few days, that boyfriend was dating Mary. In short, Mary had been snatching away her friends' boyfriends. At first, she was only doing it to her close friends' boyfriends, but as she ran out of female friends, she began targeting any girl she could find who had a boyfriend. Honestly, when I heard this, even though she's my younger sister, I was like, yeah, she'd probably do something like that. As Mary used to try and take my stuff all the time. The crayons and paints I'd get would often end up being used by her. It seems like she's always had a knack for taking things from others. However, even after I told our parents about Mary's reputation at school, and they got mad at her, I doubted she was gonna reflect on her actions. I mean, she's been like this forever. I believe her arrogant nature might be due to our relatives and grandparents always praising her too much. But those relatives and grandparents aren't gonna look after her forever. She needs to realize soon that her attitude is self-destructive, or her future might be in jeopardy. That's why, hoping for some change, I'd talk to our parents about what was being said of Mary at school. That evening, our parents confronted her, asking if the rumors about her at school were true. I thought she might dodge the question, but listening from behind the door, Mary was like, "Those guys just say I'm better than their exes, right? It just means I'm a better catch, doesn't it? Why lecture me instead of confronting the school when you realize your daughter is being badmouthed? Do you even really care about me?" She didn't seem to feel any guilt about stealing boyfriends at all. Even though those rumors exist because of her actions, she still had the nerve to blame our parents who were trying to discipline her. Both mom and dad were dumbfounded by Mary's logic. Every time Mary caused another issue, our parents tried to advise her, but she never listened. At this point, both our parents and I thought her behavior was beyond correction. But our concerns for Mary only lasted until she graduated high school. With college, she announced she was gonna live with an older boyfriend near her university. She persuaded our parents and left home. She never came back. Even in her graduating year, she didn't contact us. I don't even know if Mary managed to graduate and get a job. Since my parents were paying for tuition, it seemed they knew that Mary would eventually graduate from college. However, they were taken aback by Mary's lack of communication with the family. They were like, "We really can't imagine a person like this succeeding in the real world." But at the same time, they were also like, "If she's not gonna reach out from her end, that's fine. We don't need to force a relationship on her." So, they decided to leave Mary be. But, Mary, who had usually brush off whatever happened at home, keenly returned to our childhood house when I brought my fiancé, Thomas. Apparently, a relative who lived close to our home and adored Mary had saw me bring a man, seemingly my boyfriend, home. They immediately informed Mary.
Is this guy your boyfriend, Sarah? He's incredibly handsome. He looks like he's got his act together too. I'm surprised he wants to marry you.
Without hesitation, Mary, who had suddenly appeared at our house, spotted Thomas. While I was away from my seat, she took my spot and snugly wrapped her arm around Thomas, showering him with compliments. Even when our mom and dad told her to stop, she was like, if he's gonna marry Sarah, he'll be my big brother, right? I just want to get along with him as family from now on. She didn't let go of Thomas. Moreover, when I returned from the restroom and was firmly like, Mary, let him go, she started to fake cry. She was like, you always do this. Everyone always treats me so unfairly. Thomas watched in confusion as the situation unfolded. The gathering soon dispersed, and I asked Thomas to leave. My parents were furious with Mary. I felt relieved thinking the matter was settled, but 3 months before our wedding, I suddenly received a message from Thomas wanting to call off our engagement. When I told him I couldn't accept this just through a message on WhatsApp, Thomas was like, then, let's meet at a cafe tomorrow. The next day, I went to a cafe at the appointed time. When I arrived, Mary and Thomas were already there, sitting close and smiling at each other. Thomas looked serious when he saw me, while Mary had a smug expression. Thomas was like, I can't see myself living with you, especially after how you treated your sister Mary and how your parents reacted. That's why I want to break off our engagement, Thomas said earnestly. Mary smirked at his words. Having seen them cozying up in the cafe earlier, my love for Thomas had already gone cold. I was like, so, how much are you gonna pay me for breaking our engagement? Thomas was like, compensation? We aren't even married. We haven't even had the wedding, and it can still be cancelled, his eyes widening in surprise. I sighed deeply and replied, we exchanged engagement rings, we introduced each other to our parents, and we had a wedding planned. When an engagement is called off in such a situation, the one causing the breakup has to pay compensation. I tried to explain it patiently, but Thomas, looking dumbfounded, was like, if we're talking about the cause, it's on you. It's because you didn't treat Mary right.
There's no way that's the reason. You cheated on me with Mary, so the breakup is on you.
It seemed that Thomas was more upset about being the reason for the breakup than about paying compensation. We argued in the cafe about it. All the while, Mary was clinging to Thomas, making it clear that they were the root of the problem. I decided to call Thomas's parents to the cafe to judge who was in the wrong. Even though Thomas was their son, they must have realized the situation was inexcusable, as he had brought another woman to a serious talk about breaking off an engagement and remained close to her throughout. Sarah, we're truly sorry for what our son has done. He's talking nonsense right now, but we promise to pay for his sin, he assured me. A few days later, I decided to hire a lawyer for this matter, and eventually a court awarded me certain amount. I was told that Mary and Thomas still didn't agree with the situation, but it was likely that Thomas's parents covered the payment for him. With that, I thought, I'd never involve myself with Mary or the backstabbing Thomas ever again. Both my dad and mom had said they disowned Mary for stealing my fiancé, Thomas. I thought Mary would never return to our family home again. However, when I was around 40, working at home, my cell phone suddenly rang. It was a blocked call, but I thought it might be work-related, so I decided to answer it. Then, I heard a familiar female voice on the other end.
Hey, I bet you're still doing well. Because of me, you missed out on marriage, right? You've probably been single all these years. Such a pitiful life, living alone.
The mocking tone made me instantly realize it was Mary. Only she made fun of me like that and called me in this tone. I was like, what do you want? If you've got no business, I'm gonna hang up. Mary was like, hang on. What I've got to tell you might just change your life. You'll regret it if you hang up now. If she was going this far, there was no reason not to listen. Given her audacity, I felt compelled and was like, what's that?
I'm moving back to our family home. But since I'm expecting a child, there isn't enough room, so you need to leave within 3 days. See, I'm pregnant. For our parents, it's the grandchild they've been waiting for. I'm doing what a single woman like you couldn't.
What are you talking about?
You were disowned, remember? Since I can give them the grandchild you couldn't, I'm sure they'll welcome me with open arms. If I ask them to kick you out, I bet they'll do it, she replied confidently.
I seriously doubted that. Both Mom and Dad were furious about Mary stealing Thomas away from me. They were like, that's an unimaginably low act for any human. They wouldn't simply forgive Mary because she's having a child. Moreover, even though my engagement broke off was caused by Mary, she didn't feel guilty. Moreover, the damages were paid by Thomas, or more precisely, by Thomas's parents. Mary never apologized to me, nor did she make amends for her actions. This had always angered my parents. Even if she showed up now, they'd probably just guide her the door to leave. But Mary seemed convinced that our parents would be on her side and was like, so, make room for me. No place for a single woman in our family home. And without hearing my reply, she hung up. Although I was reluctant, I talked to my dad and Mom that I'd been contacted by Mary, that she was apparently pregnant, and that she was coming back to our house and told me to leave so that she could get a room for the child. Both my dad and Mom looked absolutely shocked for a moment, but after a short pause, as if thinking this was unbelievable, they shrugged and were like, well, guess we gotta leave too. I was relieved to hear those words. It seemed like Dad and Mom weren't really on Mary's side after all. My mom was like, when did Mary say she'll be back? Only then did I realize Mary hadn't told me exactly when she'd return. I honestly told my mom that I was told to leave within 3 days. Mom was like, in that case, we better start packing soon. My mom was also like, knowing Mary, even if Sarah doesn't leave this house, she'll barge in, make herself at home, and force Sarah out. We don't want to live with her, and Dad, sitting next to her, nodded in agreement. From that moment on, we started our moving preparations at a breakneck speed. Since we didn't know when Mary might show up, we reached out to Thomas's parents using the contact information we had kept for emergencies. What we found out was quite a shocker. Turns out, Thomas's dad is a big company CEO, and Thomas had been groomed every day to be the next CEO. He met me and we got engaged, but then he cheated on me with my sister, leading to our broken engagement. They believed he couldn't be trusted as a professional, so he got demoted to a regular employee or something. But it seems he had been hiding this from Mary. Mary always talked about the CEO Thomas as if he's some big deal, so he must have thought she'd leave him if she found out he wasn't going to be CEO. But Mary, believing Thomas would become a CEO and make lots of money, had been making extravagant purchases. Somehow, Thomas was dipping into his savings to fund Mary's spending sprees, but when he ran out of money, he tried to talk her into saving. However, she snapped back at him and was like, if you're gonna be a CEO, you should have money, right? And in the heat of the moment, Thomas was apparently like, the reason I'm not gonna be CEO is because I was gonna marry you. By that time, they had found out that Mary was pregnant, so they decided against divorce. But she was like, I'm going back to my parents' house for a while. You're broke, right? I bet my parents, who can support my single sister, have some money. And now, it seems she's living in a hotel. After a while, when relatives near our home confirm I was moving, I suppose she was planning to come to my place. And yet, I wonder if Mary thinks of me as a jobless loser or something. She can't fathom the idea that I might be making money on my own. Perhaps she's always thought of her sister, me, as lesser than her. Since Mary isn't working now, she probably assumed that I'm not only jobless but also unmarried and living off my parents. That's not the case though. After we moved, I got a call from an unknown number. Answering it, sure enough, it was Mary.
Hey! I see the house is up for sale. Where are Mom and Dad?
Mom and Dad?
They moved to a place they've always dreamed of. I didn't hear about that. Why would I tell someone I've cut ties with?
It seems Mary went to our old family home and finally realized it was on sale. Well, if there's a sign of for sale in front of the house, anyone would get that no one's living there anymore.
And you? Still clinging to Mom and Dad?
Nope, me? I decided to follow my husband on his overseas assignment.
Wait, husband!
She must have assumed I was still single, but it's been a few years since Mary stole Thomas from me. In that time, I found someone special, and we've been married for 3 years now. Given that our child is still young, I initially held off on traveling abroad. My husband went ahead, but now it seems all right to take our child and join him. I was like, I have no intention of helping you, nor do our parents. Just do your best with your beloved husband, okay, and hung up. I cancelled my cell phone service before leaving the country and set off for overseas. I still occasionally hear from Thomas's parents, so I get updates about Thomas and Mary. Without a family home to return to, and no knowledge of where her parents or sister are, Mary is left with only Thomas to rely on. It seems that after Mary drained all their savings, Thomas had a wake-up call and was like, we won't divorce since we're having a child, but from now on, you're on an allowance. But most of that allowance went towards repaying the money she squandered, so she was left with not even a cent. While taking care of their child, she eventually had to work and live with her in-laws. Now, she's working hard every day to pay off she owed. Guess a marriage stemming from deceit never really turns out well, huh?